Welcome back to Edgework here on the Hammer Betting Network. Not our typical daily live shows where we're giving out picks for the games that night, but we do have best bets here today as we get ready for the 2023 NHL Draft. But before we get into all of that stuff, I do want to remind people a couple of things here, since it has been a little while since we've done one of our daily live shows. First and foremost, if you're watching right now and you haven't hit the subscribe button, please make sure to do so. There's about 50 to 60% of people who watch these live shows, watch the videos that we're putting out, who aren't subscribed here to the Edgework channel. No need for that. Just takes 2 seconds. Hit the subscribe button. And while you're at it, you might as well hit like here on the stream today. If you guys are watching along, please feel free to participate here in the chat. We will get to the comments as they come in. If you guys have questions about the draft, thoughts on different bets, we'll try to get to all of those. So make sure to participate in the chat. And as well, I want to remind everybody, Pinnacle is the world's sharpest sportsbook and available to bettors in Ontario. You can find out what professional bettors have known for decades. Pinnacle is where the best bettors bet. You must be 19 plus and in Ontario. Please play responsibly. Not currently available in the US. Moretto, season's over. We're getting ready for the NHL draft here. We're seeing a lot of rumors surrounding the Montreal Canadiens and stuff. Before we get into all the different bets and what we're kind of looking for here, I just need to know general thoughts. How are you feeling about your Habs going into this draft?
Well, I had to suffer through like 8 months of this season. This is my season right now. This is when things really pick up as a Habs fan. We had to sit through this last little while, and it sucked. But ultimately, we couldn't tank enough, man. Could be sitting here looking at a top 2 or 3 pick, and instead we're basically just at a little drop off after those top 4 picks. So yeah, fun times.
You got any regrets from this season? Now you're looking at like maybe there is some of that drop off from where you were to where you are now, and maybe who could be available in those positions. Or are you just like, all right, it is what it is at this point?
I think not being in the top 4 is a big blow. I think there's depending on, the Mitchkov stuff, and we can get into that after, but yeah. I think dropping out of that top 4 is like, there's a pretty clear drop off there. So not being able to get one of those guys is tough. They tanked a bit late, like everyone got hurt. Everyone got hurt too late though. You needed to get guys out of the lineup and more in like December. Maybe we could have been looking at a top 3, top 4 pick here, but yeah, who knows? The draft always has some surprises. Maybe we see a surprise and, one of those top 4 guys drops out and the Habs, get lucky. Someone falls into their lap. But yeah, I think we're at a point now where the draft kind of like starts with them, and, it'll be interesting to see what they do.
All right, well, let's get into some of those top 4 guys there. And we're talking about some of the movement. We've seen some rumors coming out lately. Maybe some stuff is just being thrown at the wall, like someone we know from the Daily Face-Off who just likes to throw things out there that maybe don't make a whole lot of sense. But there has been some speculation of maybe some teams in the top 5 taking players that you wouldn't necessarily understand. So we're not going to go to Connor Bedard. I think that one's pretty much locked up. Chicago Blackhawks are going to take Bedard first overall. It would be an absolute shock if they didn't. So we'll go to pick number 2, Adam Fantilli there. Do you think there's any chance here this guy slides past 2? I don't think it's necessarily going to be like a free fall kind of situation, but is he locked in at 2? Would you think maybe there's a chance he goes beyond there? And if he does, who would be the guy who kind of jumps into that 2 hole?
Yeah, so I think if Fantilli is going to drop out, it's going to be Karlsson. I don't see a world in which Smith overtakes both of those guys. And obviously, Mitchkov, I don't see that happening either. But we see now the market has kind of adjusted a little bit. I think last week around this time, we were at a point where the market did not accurately reflect the gap between the 2 players, where, it had been reported by people who, are connected and people who have, sort of reputable sources that it was actually like closer to 50-50 with, with that second overall pick for the Ducks between Fantilli and Karlsson. So obviously, we're sitting last week where like Fantilli's like minus 900 and you got like a plus 700 on Karlsson, 650s, 700s that were out there. Naturally, I scooped some of those up. I don't think that those are going to win. But I do think, the way the market has sort of settled now at like the, more like plus 300, 350 range, I think that's a little bit more accurate, a little bit fair towards, what the gap actually is between those 2 than what had been reported, last week.
Right. Now, I guess kind of getting into this, like we've seen some of the rumors I was kind of talking about there. The one player who's been really intriguing to me is this Matvey Michkov kid out of Russia. There's a whole lot of different circumstances surrounding him in terms of why he may not go higher than kind of what he's projected as of right now. But I saw reports out there that maybe the Ducks would try to jump at him. Maybe a team in the top four would kind of take a look at him there, take a swing. Do you think that this top four is pretty much set in stone as is? Bedard, Fantilli, Carlson, Smith, even if there is any type of swapping of who takes who in what spot, kind of between 2, 3, and 4. Do you think it's stuck as is? Those are the four, or do you think there's any shot Michkov might find his way in there, or someone else for that matter?
I think it's pretty set in stone. It would take something drastic, I think, for Michkov to climb into that top four, especially like you look at some of the stuff that is working against him right now. I mean, the geopolitical climate in Russia, like, obviously the fact that he's under contract in the KHL for 3 more years, the fact that, while it's still likely he comes over, like it's not a guarantee that he ever plays here. And now, like, say what you want about Scott Wheeler, and I know, but like he is connected in terms of knowing a lot of scouts in the league, and at least, he's got a little bit of credibility there, regardless of what you think of his player evaluations and his track record. And he's reporting now too in his, his article this morning that there are actually some scouts that have concerns over Michkov's character as well. A bit of entitlement there, maybe about his play on the ice as well. A little bit more of a selfish player. So like, there's a lot of stuff that's even coming out now. I think there's just a lot that's working against him. I don't see him cracking the top four. I think a lot of these reports, even about like the Habs, there have been reports now in the last few days that all of a sudden, like actually the Habs are looking very closely at Michkov and are leaning in that direction. I think that's just it's just posturing and like, it's a smokescreen. The Habs, I think, are in a spot where, and a number of these teams are maybe in a spot where they could potentially trade down, and, getting that out there that, hey, we're interested in Michkov, can maybe have a team that's legitimately interested in drafting Michkov and that upside to maybe move up. I think that's really all that it is. But I think that we're going to see, Bedard, Fantilli, Carlson, Smith in that top four. Maybe Carlson and Fantilli swap in 2 to 3. Maybe, Carlson and Smith swap in 3 to 4. There are, reports that the Blue Jackets maybe like Smith too. But ultimately, like, that is the top four. The order, to be determined. But that is generally where we're going to be at. And I think the market is sort of reflecting that. And there's not a ton of value into betting into that at this point, where you're seeing like, pretty short prices on Fantilli to go second, Carlson to go third, Smith to go fourth. I think the only thing I'd maybe take a flyer on still at this point is Smith to go third to the Blue Jackets. While I would be surprised, I don't think I would bet it at this price. But if we see like some more movement and maybe we can get like a 350 or 300 or something like that there, I could consider it. But like ultimately, I do think that it's going to be kind of a boring top four.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I mean, you're talking about this draft starting at draft pick number 5 there, and that would be your Montreal Canadiens. But before we talk about who they might get into picking there, I just want to remind everyone again, if you guys are watching and you haven't hit the like button, hit the like button. There's about 25% of people watching right now who have hit the like button who are watching. So the rest 75% of you, I don't know what you guys are doing. I mean, as So Money says here, smash it. If you haven't already broken your mouse, as So Money has continued to tell you to do all season long, it's time to do so. So smash the like button here while you continue to watch. But let's talk about pick number 5. This is where you're saying the draft starts. I've seen a lot of, okay, the Habs guy is Leonard at 5 here. We've seen a little bit of smoke that maybe they'd try to jump up. Maybe they would even move back if they didn't think somebody would take Leonard in that position. Now kind of you see some of the, hey, maybe Michkov is the guy who they would lean towards there. Who is it that you're kind of looking at in that 5 spot as this is the guy to take? I know you and I had conversations earlier on about, hey, maybe if Michkov is available, you kind of jump all over that. That could be the spot. You hear some new reports come out. Are you scared of that? What are your thoughts on what the Habs might do at 5?
Yeah, I think that Hughes and Marty have played this pretty well, just like kind of they did last year, where like ultimately, I mean, the leaking info about Slavkovsky being their pick really didn't happen until draft day. We saw Shane Wright as like a pretty considerable favorite still, like right up until draft day. So they were able to keep things pretty close to the vest and, throw people off the scent. So I think you have to do more like connecting the tea leaves here as opposed to believing some of these reports, because who knows what's being thrown out there, especially around draft time. It's really hard to know what to believe and like what info teams want leaked and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like we've seen the Habs connected to Mitchkov, we've seen them connected to Reinbacher, we've seen them connected to Leonard, to Dvorsky, to Benson. Like we've seen so many different names linked to them that like it's impossible to know what's actually true. What I think though, just sort of connecting the dots on like Hughes and St. Louis, is that obviously character is incredibly important to them. Player interviews, they put a heavy emphasis on player interviews. And from everything I can tell, that's an area where Leonard is going to grade very highly. On ice, off ice, very high character guy. And I think that he makes a ton of sense for them, just like even organizationally, where, a guy with not the most size necessarily, but he sort of, can replace that like Gallagher mold, and that, a guy who's just like a fire plug. And, like we saw with Tkachuk, like he's maybe obviously I'm not comparing him to Tkachuk necessarily, but like he's that type of player where he's got scoring. I mean, he's like, I think third all time in goal scoring for the U.S. Development program. Like, right. He's tied with Matthews, and now he's played like 15 more games or something like that. But, he's a guy who can put the puck in the net. He brings that energy on the ice. Now, can the Habs potentially trade down a pick or two and get him? Maybe. I think that's where that kind of comes into play with this Mitchkov stuff. Hey, we're interested in Mitchkov. Maybe get a team like the Caps or someone to trade up to 5. You move down, and then you have a chance to still draft Leonard. But I think there's also risk to that, because honestly, I think that Leonard is like pretty much a lock to go in like the top 7. And if he gets by the Habs, it's very possible a team like the Coyotes that have a lot of centers in the organization, need some wingers, and need a little bit of size, considering they have some smaller centers, or guys at least that play big like Leonard. So it's possible that they can take him, or the Flyers. I mean, he fits that Flyers mold perfectly too, right? So yeah, I think that that's a bit of a risk. And ultimately, I do think they settle on Leonard with the 5th pick. And like there were like 6-1, 7-1s out there on Leonard to go 5th overall. Those have pretty much been bet down. There are still, and this has been staring at me in the face because I've betted as much as I could and I've maxed it as much as I could, and the limits are pretty low. So at this point, I can't get anything more down on this. So like if you have SIA, Sports Interaction, and you're in Ontario, and you can bet, I think if you're in Canada in general, you can bet Ryan Leonard to the Habs. They still have plus 300, 305 there for him to go 5th overall, which is pretty off market price. So yeah, that's still a very good bet. I think even like stuff as short as 2-1 that's still out there, I think that's a good bet too, because ultimately I think that's where they settle. If they do trade down, I think it's more likely they end up with a guy like Reinbacher, who fits a need at right D, a bit of an organizational need, but I don't think they take him at 5. If they stay put, I think it's Leonard.
I'm kind of curious your thoughts on this just in general. In the NBA, a lot of times you hear more about like, hey, picking at least like the top 10, you're picking for the best player available, not necessarily need. And then once you get out of there, then you kind of start to lean towards a little bit more, hey, what specifically are we looking for on this team? And then adding those kinds of guys once you get out of there, because maybe the top 10 is more loaded with talent, or like even at 5 through 10, it starts to dwindle off a little bit. How much stock do you put into it in the NHL draft, at least in the top 10 picks there, of picking for need versus picking best available? Like, what are your thoughts on just how that kind of works out?
I'm like of the mindset that in the NHL, I can't speak to the NBA because I don't know how quickly guys like actually play from the draft, right? Like I know in the NFL, it makes a lot of sense. You're drafting for need because you're drafting a guy who's going to be on your roster and contributing like, regularly in the first year, right? NHL, that's not the case. Like I don't like drafting for need whatsoever. Teams still somewhat do it. Maybe there's like glaring organizational needs where you have absolutely no depth whatsoever to position, and then maybe it makes a little bit more sense, I guess. But like ultimately, I don't like doing that because we see how quickly rosters can change and how much things can change in 2-3 years. And by the time, like if you're a team like the Habs, you're drafting Reinbacher, especially on defense, like because you need a right defenseman, and then 2 or 3 years from now, the organizational depth chart is so different, and all of a sudden you have a logjam there. And by the time he's ready to actually crack the lineup and make an impact, that's not an area of need. So for me, I don't like drafting for need whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I just kind of was curious, like thought process of how
Yeah.
other people are at with there. Because I mean, you even look at in the NHL, you basically go from a spot where it's like it's not even the top five. It's basically maybe one person, like the pick one and pick two are the guys who could potentially jump into your team that following season. Outside of that, you have no idea. That guy could join your team 2 years from now, three
Yeah.
years from now in different cases. So, yeah, I would agree there. But if you kind of move beyond picks number 5, you start to look at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 here. You're looking at some interesting teams. You talk about the Coyotes. That's a team I would be, I'm under the impression is going to kind of remain there and try to grab another high talent player like up in the draft. But you start to look at maybe the Flyers, Capitals, Red Wings, Blues there through to 10. These are all teams that we're hearing in some types of trade discussions, whether that is the ones that we're hearing between St. Louis and Philly. You hear Washington might be interested in Michkov, maybe trying to jump a team like Philly and try to get up a little bit ahead of them to get Michkov into their organization. Once you start to look at picks 6 through 8, 9, 10, even to an extent there, how do you kind of predict that whole situation playing out, whether it be team movement and guys trying to jump each other to get certain players? And then beyond that, who kind of fits into that 6 through 10 spot? Because it feels like 1 through 4, that is what it is. 5 is a little bit up in the air. And then after that, it kind of just feels pretty open.
Yeah, 100%. I think that as kind of locked in as 1 to 4 is, 5 to 8 is not maybe to the same extent, but I do think there's a pretty clear group of 4 players that will go in that 5 to 8 range as well. And obviously, like someone can crack that, like a guy like Zach Benson or a guy like Perot. But I think that we're going to see in that tier, obviously Mitchkov should go in that range. I think his floor is kind of still like 8 with Washington. I don't see him slipping past that, or at least someone
Yeah.
trading into the top 8 to take him. I will definitely see Leonard go in that range. We'll see, I think, Reinbacher go in that range, and I think we'll see Dvorsky go in that range. So I think those 4 guys are like the next 4 to go, and the order very much like up in the air because, like you said, trades. I mean, I don't think Arizona is as much of a trade candidate just because they do have those 2 picks. Maybe they try and trade up if anything. But yeah, I think that Philly, we can definitely see Philly. Maybe they add another pick, which changes their approach. Washington, maybe Washington moves up, Montreal moves down. I mean, who knows what Stevie Y is doing in Detroit? That's always up in the air. They have a ton of money to spend. Maybe they make a big splash before the draft, and all of a sudden they don't own that pick anymore. They're adding like an NHL player, guy who's ready to contribute this year. So yeah, it could definitely change up quite a bit. Although I do think that there's some value still in some of these like bets that are available, like Leonard. It's juicy now and it's been bet like pretty considerably, but like Leonard under 8.5, I believe is still out there. Even under a 7.5, because I think the Flyers is kind of his floor. I think if you're willing to sort of lay that juice, I think that's worth it. And Dvorsky under 8.5. Do not see him slipping out of the top 8, whether Washington trades up or not. I think he's a guy who can go as high as 5 to the Habs. Definitely a candidate at 6 to Arizona. A guy who fits what Philly needs. Philly kind of needs everything. So yeah, Dvorsky under 6.5. Under 8.5. I'm not sure what the best prices available are now because these markets can move pretty quickly. But there's definitely some like minus, in the high hundreds, minus 200. I think those are all still fairly bettable.
So looking at maybe specifically there, Leonard under 8.5, Dvorsky under 8.5, what prices would you be comfortable? I mean, let alone best price available, but like, let's say what prices would you be comfortable playing those up to?
Leonard, if you're getting an 8.5, I'd honestly be comfortable to like minus 350. I think that's pretty like, I would be absolutely stunned if he fell out of the top 8. And then for Dvorsky, like I'd probably say like minus 200 or so is probably my and Leonard, I would also bet it at like if you can get an under 7.5, like minus 200 or so, I think that's good too.
Yeah.
Dvorsky, I wouldn't go if that moves from 8.5 to 7.5. I'm not going to do that. But I'm looking at an offshore here, which we don't love the offshore, but an offshore with a starts with the B, and they have a minus 165 on Dvorsky under 8.5, which I think is very, very bettable still at this point.
Got you. Okay, yeah. We don't love the offshores there. We do recommend, if you're going to bet, you can sign up at Pinnacle. The link in the description of this video, this live stream, the podcast, if you're listening back after the fact, as well if you're watching on YouTube, you see that QR code in the bottom corner. You can scan that QR code, take you right to the site. You can sign up for the Pinnacle Sportsbook. It is the world's sharpest sportsbook. Unfortunately, no NHL Draft odds up there, so you can find these bets at other places, but maybe you're hearing something or you see something at the draft or trades come up ahead of time and you want to go bet on futures or anything like that. Pinnacle would definitely be the place to do it because they are the world's sharpest sports book. So thanks to Pinnacle there, but make sure to check them out. Now, okay, you get past your kind of 6 through 8 area, closing out our top 10 situations here. Lots of room for 9 and 10. It is very much up in the air. There's a lot of variables that could go on. And I mean, it is going to be like a no-duh kind of statement, but 9-10 can also be very dependent on what the heck happens 6 through 8, right? Like who falls out of there, it could become very easy to determine who goes 9-10 kind of thing. That being said, if you're going to look at this one, who are some guys you think might be able to jump into the top 10? And maybe, in your opinion, who are some guys you might be looking at like, hey, over 9.5, over 10.5, because you think maybe these guys could be falling out of top 10?
I think Gabe Perreault is a guy who I still really like the under on. Now the market has adjusted pretty considerably. There were like 13 and a halves out there last week, and we're pretty much settled in around 11 and a half. That being said, you're getting plus money still on under 11 and a half. And I think this is a guy who can very, very well crack the top 10 here. I think he's a guy who is a likely candidate. Detroit's definitely going to be looking at someone like that. I think, St. Louis can be looking at a guy like that as well. And obviously if someone were to trade up, I think Perreault's a guy who maybe they could have their eyes on, because this is a guy who's got like elite scoring talent, very gifted offensive player. His track record speaks for itself. I think he's there's been a lot of good things said about his character. There's really just like very few knocks on his game overall. Obviously his dad was a very successful NHLer, which, isn't nothing. I think, under 11 and a half on a guy like Gabe Perreault, who can easily still go inside the top 10. And I think, even if he doesn't make it into that top 10, I think, looking at 11th overall potentially to Vancouver can also make sense. So there's still some value there. I'm not going to, go and say that's like, max bet and go, smash that right now. But like, I definitely
not doing
really
like
like
a super max whale like play here.
Not a max whale play, but definitely worth putting some money on that, because I think that it's too bad you can't find like a to-go top 10 on Perreault. But I think, look, this not the best price market over here at a certain sports book, a regulated sports book, but there is a Perreault to go top 10 that's been bet to minus 190 right now at FanDuel. Obviously you're not going to bet that when you can bet, just like make sure if you're listening to this and you see that, you do not bet that over the under 11 and a halves at plus money that are available. Definitely does not make sense to hit that over some of the other prices.
Yeah. Now it is why we definitely preach line shopping here, but yes, for sure. Take a look around and see what's available out there. Okay, so we kind of looked through that area there where we're looking at maybe guys who could fall in and out. Are there any other bets that you're seeing right now that you think have value of guys, even within that top 10, where you're looking at guys that you're going to look at moving up in the top 10, moving a little bit higher, moving down in that top 10, or even guys outside of that range, even 10 through 15 through 20 that you think might take a little bit of a slide or a big jump up in the draft that you're seeing some good value on out there in the different markets across?
Yeah, inside the top 10, I think that's kind of about it for me right now in terms of what's available. Once you get out of the top 10, though, there are some interesting names and numbers to still sort of have a look at. Guys like, Sandin Pellikka is one who I keep betting, and the market hasn't fully adjusted. So I think maybe there's a little bit of market resistance against me. But I have bet some of him over 14 and a half, around like minus 110, minus 115, up to like minus 130, 140. I would keep going a little bit more on that. Like there's some, based on what's available right now, you can still find some decent prices on there. Obviously, shop around to find the best you can get. But yeah, I think he's a guy who, like, there's offensively gifted defenseman, but we see his profile as a guy who came in at the combine and measured at 5'11", playing on the back end. We know what NHL teams are kind of looking for. And, whether you agree with it or not, we see guys of that stature drop all the time. And I think he's a obvious drop candidate here. A guy who could drop to the late teens, even to like 20 or so. I don't think he cracks the top 15 just because of the size issue. And I think that, as a top 15 pick, that's kind of that's prime real estate. You're not necessarily spending that on a guy like that. I think you're more likely to take a risk on a guy like that in the late teens. Not necessarily that there's risk in there, but I think his upside in the league is a little bit more capped just based on his size, where he's more so going to be a guy who can play some, top four maybe, but like more so a power play specialist and stuff like that. And I don't think you're getting like a top pairing defenseman there. So I think he's a guy who's definitely going to drop a little bit. Another guy who's kind of interesting to me is Colby Barlow. A guy that people seem to think has a very wide range because of the fact that at the, Hlinka Gretzky Cup, he didn't have the best offensive output, but like this is a guy who shredded the OHL this year. 46 goals, 79 points, 59 games. He is 6'1". He's got a pretty good size, high character guy. I think teams are going to fall in love with him. We're seeing under 16.5 still out there. There's some very wide array of prices, but there's some, minus 150s, minus 160s. I like the under there on Colby Barlow as well. I think he ultimately can move into the top 15, maybe even a guy who like a team falls in love with earlier and he kind of goes in the early teens there. Like I can see, an Arizona at 12 or a Buffalo at 13, even Pittsburgh, at 14, kind of falling in love with a guy like that.
All right. Well, there you go. There's a bunch of different guys there that you have some different bets on. So throwing out a bunch from yourself here today. If people are listening right now, listening back, hopefully some of these numbers are available still. Is there any other bets that you're looking for right now? Any other value bets on the draft that you're seeing out there on the board right now?
I'm just doing one last sweep here to make sure this price is still available because I don't want to. It's so okay. I mean, I'm kind of weird to give out like an off-market bet as like a, but I mean, I took a lot of Edward Sale over 20.5. Now it looks like a number of books have shifted over to 22.5 and juice towards the over. So I'm a little bit more hesitant to take that at this point. I still probably would. I still think it's worth a little bit because this is a guy who's like a consensus top 10 prospect, last year for a while. And then he had a really rough season. And now there's a ton of, questions about his character on the ice, his compete level, his consistency. This is just like everything about him. And, coming off the bad season that he had, like everything about this guy shouts free fall. I cannot see him going in the top 20. I think this is like more of a luxury pick at this point where you're like a team that is kind of a team that has the luxury of taking a guy with the upside that like doesn't necessarily have to rely on him, more of like a win now team that doesn't really, need to like replenish the prospect pool as quickly. Maybe you can take a chance on him. So I think maybe he's more likely to go in like the late 20s, even late first round, like really, really back end of the first round. So like under 22 and over 22.5, sorry, I think is still decent. There is a book in Ontario as well, Botano, that still has the 20.5 at minus 133, which is a very, very good bet in my opinion.
Okay. You're talking about the 15.5. Connor Hartle here asking, would you need 16.5? Where's the 15.5 still good? I believe that was
for Barlow.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the juice would be on the 15.5 there, but if it's like, it's like kind of like minus 130 or so or better, I think that's still a good bet. Yeah.
Okay, we'll get into some more specific questions. I do have questions for you about the NHL in general, especially because we had a very big news weekend. And if you watch the Edgework show or you followed the Edgework YouTube channel all season, you would have seen David Pagnotta and Dennis Bernstein on here. throughout the season talking about stuff, and they've had themselves a pretty active weekend, especially covering the LA Kings out there and everything that's going on. So we'll get into some of that. There's some more questions in the chat. We'll get into different things there. Connor also clarifying -115, under 15.5 for Barlow there, Moretto.
Yeah, I like that.
All right. Before I get into some more stuff and some questions in the chat, I want to take a moment here to remind people or let people know that at 11:45 today, 11:45 a.m. Eastern time, that is, the World Putting League is back on the Hammer Betting Network. You can find that over on the Hammer HQ. Rob Pizzola will be hosting a live watch along. You can find him at 11:45, about 15 to 20 minutes before the event kicks off, giving out his final best bets, anything he sees value on the board, whether that's outright winners, matchups, all that kind of stuff. That is on the Hammer HQ main YouTube channel. So make sure after you're done here, you head on over there, click subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss a single moment of that, because that is electric content. You can watch the stream live on our feed there. So Rob will be commentating it, watching along for a couple of hours during that. So make sure to head on over there, 11:45 a.m. Eastern time that is at. But couple questions. Let's do some draft specific stuff first, and then we'll go over. Connor asking, any thoughts on the exact 2-3-4 market on FanDuel, Alex? You can find these in some different places as well, but specifically here, Connor is asking the exact 2-3-4 market.
Yeah, not so much anymore because those have kind of been bet into place. There was some like Carlson 2, Fantilli 3, Smith 4 that were like in like the 100 to 1 range on open, that's been bet down to like 5-6 to 1 at this point. Same thing with like, if you're, any of those like interesting combinations that potentially could happen with like Fantilli then Smith Carlson instead, or Carlson Fantilli Smith, or maybe Michkov gets in there. Any of the like the more plausible ones have sort of really been bet down, and I think at this point any sort of value is gone from there, unfortunately.
All right, next question here. Jeremy asking, what price do you think Bedard opens at for the Calder next season? I'll hang up and listen.
That's a good question.
I'll say this first. This Calder is going to be very interesting. Have you seen the list of rookies, the full class of rookies who are expected to be playing this year?
I haven't.
It is a big, long list of guys who are going to be jumping in and going to be eligible this season. I'll try to pull it up here on the side and give you like a more extensive look. But yeah, you can answer that question there. Price you think Bedard opens for the Calder?
That's honestly a great question, because I need to see this list, because I do think there's going to be a really deep class next year. And there are going to be guys in like really good situations to succeed. So, and even for Bedard, like what does Chicago do to help him out in terms of like giving him different line mates and, the team they put around him? Do they put him in like a, good spot to succeed? So I think whatever he opens at is probably going to be a little bit too short just because of the hype. But again, I don't want to give a number and like just without knowing the actual field and, and just being sort of way off there. But like definitely something that we'll look into and we will address like again at one point. And we'll have like off-season previews for all these different markets and stuff as we go through the summer here on Edgework too. So we'll definitely get to that stuff. I just don't want to give out a number without like actually having put any time or work into, looking at the market yet.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I just know it's like it involves still Shane Wright would still be on that list. Nyes, Brant Clark is jumping in there. Brant Clark jumps in there. Like there's a lot of different guys. The kids in Arizona that came out of the Minnesota hockey program. Mm-hmm. The kid from Minnesota who's playing on Minnesota. Like there's a lot of different guys outside of even just Bedard who maybe even saw some NHL games last year, whether that was to close out the regular season or into the playoffs there.
Yeah.
These guys are all going to be eligible, and it's not to take away from anything that Connor Bedard could do. It's more just like
exactly
these guys just didn't see games last year, so they're going to jump in the exact same year and be in the same position there.
And so look, it's not like I'm saying Brant Clark or Matthew Nyes are better than Connor Bedard, but like what situation would you be in if Bedard is playing with borderline AHL caliber line mates or like guys who should be in a bottom six that are on the top line versus like a Nyes who's probably playing top 6 minutes and getting some power play time for the Leafs, or Brant Clark who's probably playing top 4 minutes for like a, Kings team that could win the Pacific Division. Like you have to, consider all that stuff. And I think that if the hype around Bedard is, kind of creeps into the market, which I expect it will, I think that whatever price he opens at, it'll probably be a little bit too short.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, last thing I want to ask you about here before we head off, and people make sure that they go over to the Hammer HQ so that they can watch the World Putt League watch along. It's brought up here in the chat. I was going to get to it, but Connor Hartle bringing up, we have our Kings Tuesdays. How much more entertaining would they be if Pierre-Luc Dubois is in LA? What are your thoughts on the Dubois to LA stuff that we're seeing right now? What kind of package do you think this might include? And I mean, I've got to ask, are you disappointed to hear this news? Are you okay with it? What are your thoughts all around there?
So my disappointment is on hold. It depends entirely on what Dubois signs for. If he signs for like 8 by 7.5 or 8 even, I'll be very disappointed. Yes. Right. I will be disappointed. That being said, I think Montreal, I think Hughes was in on it the whole time. Based on everything, it sounds like Hughes was in on this. I just don't think they had the horses to compete. I mean, when we were doing our offseason previews, like obviously in our Montreal one, it was an ideal offseason for the Habs. So I said, hey, yeah, I'm going to trade for Dubois. In the Jets one, though, I made it pretty clear that you're going to get a better package from the Kings. And that's why we went the Kings route with that Dubois trade. So I think it just makes sense for Winnipeg. I think that ultimately Montreal just sort of couldn't compete with that. And I think they were asking for Doc. I think that Doc was probably a piece that they needed back if they were going to, do that Dubois trade. And honestly, I'm not down to trade Doc. You say what you want about him, but like he's a big body, a guy who can play center, needs to work on his faceoffs and stuff. But like he showed and flashed that potential that he had as a third overall pick a while ago last year. You could see the player he was potentially turning into, and he's under contract at a much lower average and under team control for a while. So just not a guy I care to part with. That being said, if like Dubois signs for like 7 by 7.5, I'll be pissed off. Missed opportunity. I don't think he's going to get the 8.5, 9 that he was asking for. So I think that once he does sign that contract and I see that the average there, I'll be a little bit upset that they couldn't make something work. But you're not going to, like, if it's Viardi and Iafallo and a first, maybe even more, who knows? How does Montreal match that, right? Like, Doc is the Viardi in that package, and then who's the Iafallo? Like, maybe Josh Anderson, but Josh Anderson comes in at a slightly higher average, and like there's like 3 more years on his contract compared to Iafallo, and maybe that's a good thing for the Jets because he's got the term and he's going to stay, but also. Like maybe they lose Iafallo next year, but also like is Iafallo maybe already a slightly better player, or better scorer at a lower average? Like it's just I think it's just tough for the Habs to have matched that. And then obviously the Habs first is that they're not going to trade the 5th overall pick. It would be the 31st overall, so you're getting a worse first round pick too. I just don't think the Habs had the package.
Yeah, that I'm not gonna lie. I think that might be a long shot for Iafallo to stay there after the fact. I can't imagine moving from Los Angeles to Winnipeg and having the opportunity to go somewhere as a UFA after that. That would be the area you're going to lean towards staying, but that's just no shot at Winnipeg, or no disrespect, which is usually a sign of some slight disrespect. But
Winnipeg's no place for a good Italian boy, I don't think. I think Iafallo's got to get to New York or something like that.
Yeah. All right. Any crazy predictions for this draft? This is the last thing. Any crazy predictions, big surprises, whether that's trades, someone shocking, moving somewhere, anything that you're thinking, this might go down?
Maybe this isn't like crazy. I'll say we have 3 top 10 picks traded before the draft happens. So like, whether it's like Habs moving down a little bit, Washington moving up, or like Detroit moving that 9th overall pick, St. Louis moving that 10th overall pick, whatever. But I think, let's say, that's my not necessarily bold prediction, but if there's a shock, I think it'll be that we'll see like a lot of movement inside that top 10.
All right. Fair enough. I appreciate it. All right. Well, for everyone in the chat here, if you guys enjoyed the show today, please make sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. As I said, about 50 to 60% of the people who watch are not subscribed here to the Edgework HQ YouTube channel. There's just absolutely no need for that. You guys can hit that subscribe button, hit like here on the stream today as well. If you are listening on podcasts after the fact, please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Does help us get out there. So we appreciate all the support. We'll see everyone over at 11:45 a.m. Eastern time for the World Putt League watch along. Rob Pizzola giving out best bets, looking ahead to the event, as well as watching it live. And you can watch the feed here on the stream. It is embedded in the stream, so you can see it right on the screen there. You can watch it, place your bets, sweat them out with us. It is a ton of fun. We'll see everyone at 11:45 a.m. for the World Putt League. And for more hockey content, you can find it here on the Edgework HQ YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss a single second of that. Moretto, thanks so much for the time today. To everyone in the chat, we'll see you guys real soon.